Okay, May 8th, 2025.
Mm-hmm.
White smoke over St. Peter's. And the world finds out, there's a new pope.
Mm-hmm.
But not just any pope. Cardinal Robert Francis Prevost from Chicago, an Augustinian, now Pope Leo XIV.
The first American pope in 2,000 years of church history.
Yeah.
Well, that's huge.
It really is. So let's get into this. What makes this event so significant? What's his story?
Well, this election happening after Pope Francis passed away, it's more than just a headline, right? It's really the peak of a life story that's got so many different facets.
Yeah.
We're going to really dig into Pope Leo XIV's background. We're using a transcript from a really good video by Holy History on YouTube as our main source here.
Right.
And the idea is to give you, a much deeper sense of who this man actually is beyond just the title.
Exactly. We want to get past that first announcement.
Yeah.
Understand the experiences, the jobs he's had, the sort of core things about him that took him from, like you said, Chicago all the way to the Vatican.
Mm-hmm.
This is basically your guide to really getting who Pope Leo XIV is.
Yeah.
And his story, it starts right there in Chicago.
It does. Robert Francis Prevost, born September 14th, 1955. And right from the start, you see the influence of his family, his local parish. That seems to have really set the stage.
It really does. A devout Catholic family, French and Italian background. His dad, Luigi Marius Prevost, was a catechist. So faith was clearly, central from day one.
Yeah.
And those early years at St. Mary's Parish in Chicago, interacting with the Augustinian friars there, that sounds key. He was an altar boy, went to the parish school. You can almost see the seeds being planted right there.
You really can. It suggests he got to know the Augustinians early on, maybe felt a pull towards them even then. And we know, obviously, that became his life's work.
Right.
Apparently, even back then, people saw he was smart, had some leadership potential. And that path led him to an Augustinian minor seminary. He graduated in 73.
Okay, so this feels like a big fork in the road, doesn't it? Choosing between being a diocesan priest, serving a local area, or joining an order like the Augustinians, the OSA. What pulled him towards the Augustinians specifically?
Well, the source we looked at really highlights the Augustinian focus on community, on unity among the members, and of course, the deep theology of St. Augustine himself.
Mm-hmm.
That mix of, let's say, intellectual life and living together in community, that obviously clicked with him. And you see that intellectual side in his later studies, too. He got a Bachelor of Science in mathematics, actually.
Math from Villanova in 77. That's interesting. Villanova, another Augustinian place.
Exactly. So that analytical thinking, that ability to work through complex stuff logically, must have been helpful, even for theology later on.
A mathematician pope.
Right.
You don't hear that every day. Makes you wonder if that structured thinking will play a role now.
Could be.
And so, same year, 77, he enters the Augustinian novitiate in St. Louis, takes his final vows in 81. So fully committed to the OSA by then. But the studying didn't stop there.
No, not at all. He did his theological training back in Chicago at the Catholic Theological Union, got his Master of Divinity.
Okay.
Then his superiors, seeing his potential, I guess, sent him to Rome to study canon law.
Oh, Rome.
At the Pontifical University of St. Thomas Aquinas, the Angelicum, people call it. He ended up getting both a licentiate and a doctorate in canon law there.
Canon law.
Yeah.
So the church's own legal system, essentially. That's deep diving into the mechanics of the church.
It is. And his doctoral thesis was actually about the role of the local prior within the Augustinian order. So really specific to how his own community was run.
That shows a real focus on the internal workings, the leadership structures.
Exactly. Understanding leadership within his own order.
Yeah.
And his ordination as a priest. That happened in Rome, too, June 19th, 1982. Archbishop Jean Jadot presided.
Wasn't he involved in interreligious dialogue?
He was, yeah. Pro-president of what's now the Dicastery for Interreligious Dialogue. So even early on, Prevost is getting this exposure to the universal church right there in Rome.
But after all that studying, his path took a really different turn. A big one, Peru.
Yes, the missionary years. Big shift. In 1985, he gets assigned to the Augustinian mission in Chulucanas. That's in the northern Pura Desert in Peru. Really remote, challenging place.
And this wasn't just a short stint, was it?
Not at all. Almost 2 decades, off and on. From 85 to 86, then back from 88 to 98. And doing everything, parish priest, diocesan jobs, teaching in the seminary, running things.
Wow. Just completely immersed in the local reality there. This wasn't theory anymore. This was like church on the ground.
Totally. And think about the experience. dealing directly with poverty, social inequality, the specific needs of indigenous communities. It must have profoundly shaped his view of the church's role in the world.
You have to think so. Very much in line with Pope Francis's later focus, that church for the poor.
Absolutely. And he clearly felt a deep connection. He actually became a naturalized Peruvian citizen.
Really?
Yeah. Learned Spanish fluently, really understood the culture, which, turned out to be incredibly important later in his career.
That makes sense. It gave him this bridge, didn't it, between the global north and the global south within the church. Definitely part of his profile later on. And Peru was also where he first got involved in tackling that really difficult issue, clergy sexual abuse.
That's right. He was the first president of the Episcopal Commission for the Protection of Minors and Vulnerable Adults in Peru. He actually organized meetings with victims.
Including victims from that awful Sorolicium Christiani Vitae scandal.
Yes, them too. So it shows he was engaging with the problem early on, trying to connect with those harmed. But this is also where things get a bit more complicated, looking back.
Right. The source material we have mentions allegations from 2025 tied to the Diocese of Chiclayo, something about a $150,000 settlement involving abuse claims against a priest.
Mm-hmm.
And his supporters, the transcript says, see these as, like, media distortions. They insist he was always committed to justice for victims.
It's definitely one of those areas where there are different perspectives. We just need to lay those out clearly. It's certainly something people were asking about, how his past handling of things would be seen now with the ongoing crisis.
Sure, understandable. But his leadership journey wasn't just in Peru. He came back to the U.S. in '99.
He did. He became the provincial of the Augustinian province of Chicago, which basically means he was in charge of the Augustinians in that whole region.
Okay, so a big leadership role within his order back home.
Yeah.
And that must have put him on the radar for the wider Augustinian world.
Seems like it. Because in 2001, he was elected prior general of the whole Order of St. Augustine, led the entire order worldwide for 2 terms until 2013.
Wow, prior general. That's managing a global religious order. Huge experience dealing with different cultures, different church situations all over the planet.
Immense experience, lots of travel, overseeing communities in Africa, Asia, Europe, Latin America. He got a reputation as someone who could, bring different groups together, a unifier.
But that time as provincial in Chicago, that also came with some difficult scrutiny, didn't it? Regarding the Richard McGrath abuse case.
It did. The transcript we reviewed notes the criticisms, specifically that McGrath was allowed to stay near a school until he was finally removed in 2012.
And the defense was that he was following the rules, the protocols of that time.
That's what supporters say, yes. But groups like S01EP, the Survivors Network, were understandably very critical. Again, it's important to acknowledge both sides of that, the pain involved, and the different ways people view those past decisions.
Yeah. And those past issues were definitely part of the conversation when he started emerging as a potential pope, right?
Absolutely. They were part of his record, things people considered. But his path kept moving forward. In 2014, he was appointed apostolic administrator for the Diocese of Chiclayo back in Peru, sort of like the interim leader.
Okay.
And then, in 2015, he was consecrated a bishop.
So back to Peru, but now as a bishop, a major leader in the formal church structure there. And his style as bishop sounded like it fit well with Pope Francis's vision.
Very much so. The sources mention his emphasis on synodality, that more collaborative, listening approach.
Right, listening to the laity, involving more people.
Exactly,
Right.
building more inclusive structures. That definitely aligned with Francis's reforms and likely boosted his profile within the Vatican.
You can see how. And he took on other roles in Peru, too. Head of the Bishop's Commission for Education and Culture, involved with Caritas Peru.
Yeah, showing that commitment to social issues, education, the church's work in the wider world.
And then the calls from Rome started getting more significant. Congregation for the Clergy in 2019. Then the Congregation for Bishops in 2020. That's a big one.
Huge. You can really see the trust building, his influence growing in Rome. Those appointments were clear signals.
And then the really key appointment, prefect of the dicastery for bishops in January 2023. That's a powerhouse position.
It really is. That dicastery has a huge say in vetting and recommending bishops all over the world. Plus, he also became president of the Pontifical Commission for Latin America. So heading up the dicastery for bishops gave him this incredible insider view of church leadership globally.
And his approach there, in that dicastery role, seems like he was trying to appoint bishops in the mold Pope Francis favored.
The transcript suggests that, yes, a shift towards bishops focused on being pastors, humble, close to the poor, shepherds first, not just managers.
How is he described by people who worked with him then?
Well, one French bishop apparently called him discreet, pragmatic, a good listener, someone who asks smart questions and can pull complex things together.
Sounds like a useful skill set for that job.
Definitely. And then Pope Francis elevated him cardinal deacon in September 23, then cardinal bishop in February 25. Those were really strong endorsements, showing deep trust.
But even with that trust from Francis, the questions about his past handling of abuse cases didn't entirely go away.
No, they were still there. The transcript mentions that some cardinals, some victim advocates, kept raising those concerns, arguing the next pope needed, an absolutely spotless record on that front.
While others saw those criticisms differently.
Right. Others felt it was maybe an attempt to derail a candidate who was seen as being very much aligned with Pope Francis and his direction for the church. So there was definitely tension around that going into the conclave.
And that 2025 conclave, everyone was watching. After Pope Francis, 133 cardinals eligible to vote, and Prevost emerged as a frontrunner, a papabile. Why him specifically? What was the combination?
It was his really unique profile, wasn't it? He's American, but with all that time in Peru, that global experience, he knew the Vatican system from his dicastery job, but he also had those deep pastoral roots from his missionary years.
So an insider who was also an outsider, in a way.
Kind of, and seen by many as a moderate, someone who could maybe bridge some gaps between different groups in the church.
What about the American thing? Was that seen as a negative? Sometimes it has been.
Less so this time, apparently. The transcript suggests the makeup of the College of Cardinals has changed, maybe making nationality less of a deciding factor. Plus, his Peruvian citizenship helped paint him as more of a global figure, not just the American candidate. His supporters, people like Cardinal Mardiaga, were highlighting his competence, his vision, how he fit with Francis's priorities.
And then, May 8th, 2025, white smoke, he's elected. Chooses the name Leo XIV. That name itself, Leo. That signals something, doesn't it?
It certainly makes you think. Immediately you think of Leo XIII, known for his intellectual depth, his social teaching, especially Rerum Novarum.
Right, the encyclical on labor and capital.
Exactly. But there were other important popes named Leo too, like Leo X, Leo XI. So the name might suggest maybe a focus on intellectual life, social issues, maybe even reform.
So now, Pope Leo XIV steps in, and the church he inherits. It's facing some serious challenges, declining numbers in the West, growing secularism, internal divisions. It's a tough job description.
It really is a complex time. But that Augustinian background, that emphasis on unity, on community, maybe that provides a way forward, a focus on dialogue, on the synodal path Francis started.
That seems likely. The expectation is probably continuity with Francis's big themes. Social justice, caring for the environment, reaching out to the marginalized.
And his own background seems tailor-made for engaging with the global church, doesn't it? That missionary time, knowing Spanish, Italian, English fluently, that helps connect with communities everywhere, especially in the global south where the church is growing.
True. But what about the potential challenges mentioned? The transcript noted maybe some reticence, some caution on certain hot-button moral issues.
Right.
Like homosexuality, gender ideology.
Yeah, that was mentioned. He might need to clarify his stance more as pope, given the strong feelings on different sides within the church. And of course, the clergy abuse crisis isn't going away.
No. His experience in Peru and at the dicastery gives him insight. But those past controversies mean people will be watching very closely.
Exactly. Supporters will point to his stated commitment to victims and accountability. Critics will be looking for decisive action. It's going to be a major focus.
But stepping back from the big issues for a moment, what's he like personally? What picture emerges?
The descriptions are generally of someone humble, warm, pastoral. Apparently he's an amateur tennis player.
Really?
Yeah. Loves Peruvian culture, the food, the music. Colleagues seem to describe him as a listener, someone who likes to build consensus.
And that Augustinian motto, in the one Christ we are one. That sounds like it could be his vision for the church.
It really does. Unity and diversity. And just the sheer weight of history, the first American pope, leading 1.4 billion Catholics. It's pretty staggering when you think about it.
It really is. So from Chicago roots to those missions in Peru, leading the Augustinians, leading Vatican departments.
Yeah.
Now this historic election, Pope Leo XVI, it's quite a journey. Chicago grit, Peruvian heart, and Roman wisdom, as the transcript put it. A good summary.
A very fitting summary. So when you think about all of that, his whole background and the challenges the church is facing right now, What parts of Pope Leo IV's story, his priorities, strike you as most important for the future? What questions does this whole deep dive leave you with about the papacy and where the global church might be heading now?